In contemporary psychology, crises are often approached through the language of stress, trauma, adaptation, or resilience. Yet, across multiple disciplines such as biology, anthropology, psychology, and symbolic traditions, transformation appears as a much deeper process. This video explores a central hypothesis that human beings evolve through cycles of deconstruction, transition, and reconstruction, and that certain life crises may represent developmental passages rather than simple dysfunction. In biology, transformation is not an exception. It is a part of the structure of life itself. Charles Darwin demonstrated that living organisms survive through adaptation to changing environments. Evolution does not proceed through stability, but through continuous adjustment between organisms and external conditions. And human beings are not outside this process. However, human transformation introduces an additional dimension, reflexive consciousness. Human beings do not simply adapt behaviorally, they also interpret experience psychologically and symbolically. This distinction is important because major life events often produce not only practical disruption, but existential disorientation. Carl Jung explored this process through the concept of individuation. For Jung, psychological development is not limited to social adaptation or external success. It involves a gradual integration of unconscious dimensions of the psyche. According to Jung, periods of crisis often emerge when the existing structure of identity becomes too narrow to contain psychological development. This explains why transformation frequently begins with uncertainty rather than clarity. The old identity weakens before a new organization becomes possible. In this sense, disorientation may not always indicate regression, it may sometimes signal reorganization. Anthropology reveals similar structures. Arnold von Gennep, in his work on rites of passage, demonstrated that many traditional societies organized human transitions through three stages: separation, liminality, and reintegration. Victor Turner later described liminality as an intermediate psychological and social state in which previous structures no longer fully operate, while new forms have not yet stabilized. This transitional phase is particularly important. Contemporary societies often tolerate productivity more easily than uncertainty. Yet, transformation frequently requires an intermediate state where identity becomes temporarily unstable. Alchemical symbolism offers another model of transformation. Carl Jung interpreted alchemical stages not as primitive chemistry, but as symbolic representations of psychological development. The first stage, Nigredo, corresponds to dissolution and fragmentation. Psychologically, this stage reflects periods in which familiar structures lose coherence. The second stage, Albedo, represents clarification and purification. This phase involves discernment, the examination of beliefs, attachment, conditioning, and identity structures. The final stage, Rubedo, symbolizes reintegration, not a return to a previous state, but the emergence of a more coherent organization of the self. This sequence deconstruction, clarification, and reconstruction, appears repeatedly across psychological, anthropological, and symbolic systems. Contemporary psychology increasingly recognizes that difficult experiences may produce developmental transformation. Research on post-traumatic growth, developed by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Colon, suggests that some individuals emerge from major crises with a greater psychological depth, clearer priorities, and a transformed relationship to meaning. This doesn't imply that suffering is inherently positive, but it does suggest that crises may contain the possibility of reorganization and growth. Transformation, therefore, cannot always be reduced to symptom reduction or rapid recovery. Sometimes, a deeper question concerns what is attempted to emerge through the disruption itself. Across biology, psychology, anthropology, and symbolic traditions, a similar patterns appears repeatedly. Human beings evolve through cycles of dissolution and reconstruction. This process is rarely linear. It often involves uncertainty, instability, and the temporary loss of direction. Yet, these phases may also represent necessary transitions in psychological development. Perhaps transformation begins precisely at the moment when previous forms of identity can no longer sustain the next stage of life. If you like to explore this question further, you can find additional resources. I also develop an online course that you will find on my website, elizabethcario.com. You have all the information on the screen. So thank you for watching this video.